Okay, we're going to begin talking about what's called the cult of domesticity. This is the thesis. Make sure you write this down because it's extremely important. So it's industrialization and religious revival combined to create the cult of domesticity, which many argue led to the cult of redemptive womanhood and voluntarism. So a lot of this probably not going to understand until we get going, but it's really a formula of A plus B equals C, which leads to D. So I'll go through each of these points as we go through. All right, so here are the preconditions, and this is going to give you a little bit of an overview. So we'll go through each one of these points one by one. But the preconditions for the cult of domesticity is the transportation revolution, the agricultural revolution, then the transition to factories. Religious revival gets added in, and then we get the cult of domesticity, which is going to lead us to voluntarism, or the cult of redemptive womanhood, which again I'll explain. Okay, so just like the last couple of lectures on the West and Jacksonian America, this is also going to be about the 1800s. So it's not necessarily, one comes after the other, but they do build on each other. But in the 1800s, the United States wanted to become more unified. So we were going to do that through the transportation revolution. And this is a picture of some canals being built. And usually in class, I would be able to ask you, what's a canal? So a canal is a waterway. For example, the Erie Canal would lead from the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. And it's a way to transfer products and again, to unify us. Another way to unify us with the transportation revolution is the railroads. So you can see railroads built before 1861, the red, and then the kind of bluish was railroads built before 1900. But you can see again that we're trying to unify. So we might have, people coming from Europe over on the East Coast, and then they want to travel within the country. And then maybe there's cattle or something in the middle, or corn or whatever that needs to go from the Midwest back to the East Coast. We also have federal stage roads, and those were developed by Thomas Jefferson, again, to unite us. This is kind of just an old advertisement, but text messaging 101, and this would be the telegraph. So that again would unite us. They used to have the Pony Express, bringing mail across the Rocky Mountains, and now with the telegraph, we can communicate more easily. Okay, next we have the agricultural revolution, and usually again I'd be able to ask, what do you think this lady is doing? She's making candles. So people weren't completely self-sufficient, but they, did do a lot of their own stuff. But we do get a transition into factories and more industrialization. So one of the transitions here is a gentleman, it's a peddler, right, who's going door to door with his goods. And you don't need to write this down, but just kind of keep this in mind, that in 1810, about 85% of Americans worked on farms, but 1850, only 50% of Americans worked on farms. So where did the 35% go? Well, they went to the factories, right? But not immediately. There were two systems, the putting out system and the apprenticeship system. The apprenticeship system's been going on since the medieval age, 1000 AD or whatever, where I would have kids brought into my home, and let's say I make hats. So they're going to, my neighbors might give me a couple of their kids, and then they would learn this trade. And I would give them a couple of my kids, like that maybe they made shoes or saddles or whatever. But it'd be more of a family situation. With the putting out system, that one's a little different. So a factory owner would give, let's say, 10 different households a bunch of fabric. And then what I would do is I would get up in the morning, I'd make some breakfast, might feed the chickens, whatever, and then make a couple of dresses. Then I'd have some lunch, we have some beer, because water and milk are not healthy. Then I'd make a couple more dresses. I'd, have some dinner, make some more dresses. So how am I being paid? It's not by the hour, right? It's by the dress. So it's called piece rate, PIECE rate. And this was something that happened before the factories. Okay, so we do definitely get factories, and what I want you to note here is 1810, 1820, just how low the output was, but then you can see it just basically skyrocketing. And something that I need to point out here is in the North, New England, I think we like to say, oh, we were so holy and good because we didn't have slaves, especially after the American Revolution, as we will be talking about. But the problem is that, first off, where is this cotton coming from? Well, it's coming from the South, so we're definitely demanding this cotton and providing money for these slave owners. On top of that, New England, these cotton factories, they did make what was called the N-word cloth. So they provided material for the slaves' clothing. So again, the North was very involved in slavery too. They didn't have slaves, but they did again provide a place to sell the cotton, and they provided the cloth. Okay, so two of the first factories were Waltham and Lowell. And what I need you guys to know about Waltham and Lowell is that the very first people that worked for these two factories, were young, single farm girls. And that's going to be one of your first questions. We'll talk about that, and let me just get to it. But this is the factory with the water coming through, and you can actually go to visit Lowell. I actually did do that with my daughter. And you go in, and it's just they had the sewing machines going, so you can hear how really, really loud it was. But this is going to be a letter that Mary Paul wrote to her father. And I know you're going to stress that, somebody did die, but it's not later industrialization where we get the sweatshops. The difference is, and let me just go back here, is that these girls lived in dormitories. They were watched very carefully. The point is that when America looked over at England and we thought of like Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist and these horrible child labor sweatshops, we didn't want to have anything to do with that. We didn't want to have these black skies and just tons of pollution and abuse. We wanted to do it differently. So that's why we offered these young single farm girls jobs, and they had their own money. A lot of times it was sent to their father, but they had some independence, and this is where they started talking about rights, and they actually did a strike. Now, when the immigrants are going to come in, the Irish, they're going to be willing to work for a lot less, so they're going to replace these young girls. But this is the 1820s, 1830s. Please know we're going to talk about going into the homes in a little bit with the women. That's the cult of domesticity, is women being in the home. Please know it wasn't women were in the home and then they broke out and now had all these jobs and that was it for the rest of the time. They actually are young girls that are going to be working, but then what they want to do is be married and live and be at home and have maids that do all their work. So that's like the goal, is to actually go back home. But they did enjoy their freedom here. Okay, so next we're going to do religious revival. And normally I would do a whole day on this, but we're going to sum this up in a couple of slides, and there are some questions to answer. But in the 1800s, we had religious revival, and that would be the Second Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening happened around the American Revolution. We're not going to talk about that. But anyways, with the religious revival, we have utopianism and millennialism. So utopia, you probably know what that is. It's a perfect society. Millennialism is this belief that Jesus is going to come back and rule for 1,000 years. So the major thing is that there was no more Calvinism, meaning God chooses you, right? It's now we can choose salvation. We can create a perfect world. Okay, so please write that down, because this is going to tie everything together. It relates everything to cult of domesticity, to the different religions, everything. So it's now me making that decision. And here would be a picture of a religious revival. Again, these happened for like 40 years. I'm going to ask you a question about them in just a minute. But you see men and women all, gathered together, and there's a lot of emotion, and there might be, 300 lay preachers, everybody kind of yelling at you and stuff. And there is a document that I need you to look at, the autobiography of Peter Cartwright. So what would be your reaction to the scene if you were either a Calvinist, a drunk, the spouse of someone who converted, and someone who converted? Please answer for two of the following. But I need you to please show that you read the document in your answer. Please make reference to some things in the document, okay? All right. So also during this time, it's pretty interesting. A lot of people got into different religions. For example, Jemima Wilkinson went into this coma. And when she came out of the coma, she started referring to herself as the public universal friend. And she refused to have any female pronouns attached to her. She just said she was genderless, which I think is fascinating considering this is like 1830, right? Okay, so a bigger group is the Shakers, and let me go through the different notes on this. But the Shakers were founded by a woman named Anne Lee, who was an illiterate factory worker from England. And they believed in celibacy, in other words, no sex, but they practiced a shaking dance, hence they became known as the Shakers, even though they had a much longer name officially. At their height, they had 6,000 believers in 19 towns. Now, you might say, well, if they have celibacy, then how did they get more people? And actually, people joined for a lot of reasons. So let me just show you the furniture first real quick, and then we'll go over the reasons. But you still can get Shaker furniture. It's, expensive, whatever, but it's absolutely beautiful. It's very, very simple. And the Shakers believe that God worked within their hands. But anyways, the reason why people would join is like there's a video I normally show if we were in class, and this girl, her dad married a new woman, a stepmother, and the stepmother was really mean to her. So the dad and the stepmother decided to put this girl in with the Shakers. So people would come and live with the Shakers sometimes, for a short time or whatever, but this young girl really, really enjoyed spending the rest of her life with the Shakers. So this is where they were located. A lot of this is going to be in the Northeast. All right. So then we also have the Mormons. This is also during this time. And as you can see, there's lots of wives here and one guy, right? I know we still have the fundamentalists. I'm actually reading a book on that right now. Official Mormonism doesn't believe in polygamy anymore, meaning many wives. But in 1820, there was a 14-year-old Joseph Smith. He sought God for answers. He believed that the angel Moroni guided him to some long-buried golden plates in the hill Cumorah. Smith was able to translate these plates with spectacles. His translation became the Book of Mormon, and they argue that Jesus came to America. So question 3, as document 3, is regarding Brigham Young, who actually was the successor of Joseph Smith. And just a quick aside, Joseph Smith was killed in a riot. Remember, we talked about riots last time. So Joseph Smith was killed in a riot when he was in jail. But regarding Brigham Young, his successor, what are 2 points here which surprise you and why? He's going to talk a bit about polygamy and the power of women. Okay, another group during this time were the Millerites, and they believed in the end of the world. So William Miller believed that Jesus would return on March 21st, 1843. As far as you know, did that happen? No. A convert recalculated October 22nd. As far as you know, did that happen? No. They ended up becoming the Seventh-day Adventists, but that was another pretty big group. The Oneidas is one of my favorites, pretty crazy, but you can see a ton of people in here, right? So the Oneidas are basically the opposite of the Shakers and believed in having sex with everyone in their group. They were founded by John Humphrey Noyes, who had a nervous breakdown. So his group was based on 4 beliefs. Complex marriage means that everybody was married to each other. Male continence, meaning when you are involved sexually, the guy needs to withdraw. So they actually were pretty successful on that. Only 40 children were born over 20 years with 250 members when their main thing is having sex. Is kind of interesting. Ascending fellowship, and you'll read about this, is that the older guys need to be with the younger girls, and the younger guys need to be with the older women. So the younger men practiced on the older women who couldn't get pregnant. And then anyway, so John Humphrey Noyes didn't want the young kids to go off on their own. And also another belief was that they could not criticize their leader. They can criticize each other, but not their leader. So at their height in 1878, believe it or not, they had 306 members. It was considered illegal what they were doing, so they told they had to stop, but they didn't like that they had to stop. So the Oneidas became famous, first off, rich. They got money from a rat trap that they created, R-A-T, rat trap. But then if you ever, you guys are probably too young to be married, but when you go get married, you're going to register for gifts. And one thing you'll be able to see is the Oneida silverware. So Oneida silverware is, that's how they made a lot of their money. So there is a document regarding the Handbook of the United Community. What is John Humphrey Noyes talking about? Can you tell what the justification is for these practices? Okay, so now we're going to get into the cult of domesticity. And again, all those things, industrialization and religious revival, are going to lead into this. So the cult of domesticity is this major belief by everyone. It's mostly white middle class, but that women are in the home, but that they have this superior role, that they're more moral and more religious. This is actually going to even come into play when women get the right to vote in 1920. So please pay attention, because this matters a lot. And it's going to relate with the slavery lecture, lots of stuff. So anyways, let's start off with Republican motherhood. And as you remember from the American Revolution, women were definitely involved in the American Revolution. They weren't necessarily nurses yet. We're not going to have that till the Civil War. But they were travelers with the war. They would take care of the businesses while the husbands were away. We had the one woman who served as a soldier. That was, again, pretty unusual. But here, we can see that women are able to contribute to the war, right? And that's called, well, it's going to be close to Republican motherhood. So Republican motherhood is once we, as Americans, United States, whatever, get our independence, we don't have a king or dictator telling us that our kids need to be good or we need to be good. So we have to have good citizens. And who teaches the good citizens? It's the women. And that's Republican motherhood, that women are teaching the kids how to be good citizens. And if they're teaching them, they need to have education. So there were a lot of female schools that arose during this time. Now, a big part of cult of domesticity is what's called haven in a heartless world. And haven means a safe place in a heartless world. And what's important here is that we're starting to develop this idea of the private sphere versus the public sphere. Before this, really, that wasn't the case where women were in the home and men were out working. That's not the case at all. They were working on farms. They were working together. They were working in businesses together, and both parties, brought up the kids and whatever. But now we're going to have women are going to be in the home. Again, please be very careful about using the word just. I always give a lot of lectures on that if you say that women are just in the home, then basically would you say that to your mom? Would your Mother's Day card say, thanks, Mom, for just being in the home, just bringing us? You don't do that, right? We don't want to devalue women's work or motherhood or whatever. But take a look at this picture. So the woman is in the home. All the kids are dressed in white, which is super impractical. The man has come in from the public sphere. So the man is out working, and it's really considered the cruel, evil public sphere. And when he comes into the home, it's kind of like he's sanctified, he's purified by the religious morality of his wife. Here's another picture where this woman is in the center, and she's got the kids, one playing the piano, one reading, and again, she's in the center. You're not going to see that with like a Puritan picture, right, where the woman is the center. It's usually the man. Okay, so 4 attributes of an ideal woman. And I'm going to have you look at Lydia Sigourney. It is not an easy document. It seems more like poetry. But I want you to look at 5 attributes of a respectable woman. I'm going to give you some examples, but I'd like for you to come up with your own. And again, be careful about how you quote and what you're looking at. Please don't just, try to fulfill your own argument. And women were being put down and stuff. Okay, that's not what she's saying at all. In fact, she calls them the priestess at the altar. That was not at all being put down. But women were domestic. They're supposed to be in the home. Submissive, not one I like, but yes, submissive. But again, in charge of the home. Pious would be that they were the religious ones. So during the Second Great Awakening, they were the ones that got saved mostly. And that's going to give them that moral authority, which is really important. And then pure is very interesting. We started developing at this time that women, it's not that they were the temptresses anymore, which is how, women a lot of times had been seen, but that they were passionless. They didn't have any passion at all. And in fact, there's a document that sometimes I show my students where it's the 1890s. It's talking about a man and woman getting married. And the advice to the bride is, basically have sex that night, but then, try to stay away from him, have sex to have that first child, whatever, and then just stay away. So what this leads to is what's called the spermatic economy. And this is going to sound really weird, but it really was the overall view. And the view was that everybody only has a certain amount of sexual energy. And if you, let's say, have an orgasm, then you're not going to be able to work the next day because you're using up all your energy. And again, this is very much white middle class belief. They believe that masturbation would lead to insanity. It's not just evil sin anymore. It leads to insanity. If girls are studying a book, it could help to deflate their breasts and make them more masculine. They believe that girls, if they were having their period, should not be studying at the same time. So basically, if they're having their period, they need to just really rest. There's a whole book written on this. And again, a lot of people believe this. With girls with sports, they felt that they had to be very careful. There's a lot of fainting girls, again, but girls are supposed to be, passionless and also just, pure and good. So we're going to get to that. So that's when we get into this good girl versus bad girl. And with the bad girl, you can see on the left, if you are reading bad literature, novels, that's going to lead you to a horrible life. And there's a whole book again on this. So this girl at 20, she's flirting. At 26, she's sitting on the lap of a man who's not her husband. And at 40, she's an outcast. The better route, they're saying the good girl, and we're going to see this bad girl, good girl theme continue. But here she's studying, then she's at church, then she's a loving mother, then she's an honored grandmother. Okay, so usually I do this whole thing on the birth rate is down, which it does go down quite a bit, and I'm able to ask you about that, but you're not here, so I have to just tell you. So the birth rate does go down from 10 kids down to 6 kids or whatever, because this dramatic economy theory, right, that white women are supposed to be passionless, so not having as much sex. Women were educated, so they're married later. Urbanization required less children to help the family, right? With farms, you need a bunch of kids to help with the farm. Now they're urbanized in cities. Healthier children meant families could have less children to have the same amount survive. There were wars, so the men were away. And also there was some birth control. It was all illegal. Please know that. Birth control for married was not legal till 1960. I'm not saying that wrong. 1960 for unmarried, 1970. But they did have unofficial forms of birth control. They might have it advertised only for married ladies or whatever. But it'd be like douching, withdrawal, some sponges. They did have some abortions. I wouldn't call that birth control, but they did. So just reminding you again of the theme before we go on. Industrialization and religious revival combine to create the cult of domesticity. But now we're going to lead into the cult of redemptive womanhood and voluntarism. So redemptive means that you're redeeming society. Remember when we talked about with religion, that we're going to able to create a perfect society. And this is how women are going to be using that pure morality and religious kind of superiority to help create a better world. And that's voluntarism. So we're going to start off with Dorothea Dix. And Dorothea Dix, now let me just ask you this. So she is going to teach religion to women in prisons. Okay, so normally what I'd ask is, is it okay for women to teach? Yes, they're supposed to teach. Can she teach religion? Yes. Can she teach religion to other women? Yes. But here's where she's pushing it. She's actually going into prisons. She's going to insane asylums. Here is a account by her. They're not really supposed to public speak, so she wrote about all this. And she used that religious moral superiority to go into these different places and to say, hey, this is wrong. This is not okay how they're being treated. You can see one man caged, one man, 2 in the jail, doubly chained. Okay, so I would say too, is it a feminist, a feminine thing to write a newspaper? Well, usually not, but look what this is called, the Advocate of Moral Reform or Family Guardian, right? So if it's called that and you're helping your family, then maybe it's okay. So again, you see how women are using this moral superiority to kind of push the boundaries, right? Okay, temperance is another one. Temperance means anti-alcohol. So again, remember the good girl, bad girl. Well, it's right here. Here's the girl in the white, and she is pulling the guy away from the alcohol, and the girl in the blue is pulling him towards. So the good girl's the white, blue is bad girl, right? So the deal with temperance is women during this time didn't have power over their salaries, any kind of money that they brought in. They didn't have any power over their children. So a man could go and drink all of his salary, drink her salary, and then take the kids. So women rose up in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and they said enough. Here's another, this is a Women's Christian Temperance Union. It's kind of funny. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. Anyways, this is another one. It's a temperance activist. And this woman, Mrs. Margaret Freeland, she went in, her husband was being given alcohol, and she broke apart this guy's house and, or his alcohol place, his bar or whatever it was. So Rosendale actually was arrested for selling liquor unlawfully, and he ended up withdrawing his complaint against Mrs. Freeland and paid the cost and gave bail. See down on the bottom? Mrs. Freeland was called a pious mother of a fine family of children and a highly respectable member of the Episcopal Church. She didn't get in trouble at all for completely destroying this guy's place, because again, she's using her religious and moral superiority, authority is an important word, to take care of her family. Okay, suffrage is going to be our last point, but this is a bit of a story that you need to know, and this is really important, especially when you're going to answer a question later on for the 1920s when we get there. But suffrage does not mean to suffer, it means the vote. And here we have Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the left, and we have Susan B. Anthony on the right. So what happened, Susan B. Anthony, you probably recognize her name, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her friend Lucretia Mott went over to England, and a lot of these middle-class women were very involved in anti-slavery, which we're going to talk about later in another lecture. But they went to the London Anti-Slavery Congress, and once they got there, they were not allowed to sit or to speak. And, you know, you spend all your money going across the sea, right? And they're pretty respectable, pretty, you know, have a lot of, you know, authority, whatever. Here, they were upset. So they thought, hey, we need to do women's rights instead for a while. So what they did is they had a convention called the Seneca Falls Convention, SENECA, and they created what was called the Declaration of Sentiments. So I'm definitely going to be asking you about this. But take a look at this. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. So what they did is they took the Declaration of Independence, and what did they add? Women. And then what they talked about is how men were tyrants over them, right? We don't have it's not the king that's the tyrant, it's the men. So why is it important that they use the Declaration of Independence as their model? Okay, and then I need you to give 2 examples of how men have been tyrants over women. Please note, you guys, that they were arguing that women and men were equal. Now, this was 1848. Women don't get the vote until 1920. So is that a good argument? Do people believe that? It's a good argument, but people don't believe it. Not for 72 years do we get the vote. The way women got the vote, and we're going to talk about this in the 1920s, is by, again, drawing on that religious morality, the religious authority. The way we argue in 1920 to get the vote is women are more religious, more moral. They already take care of the home, so they should be able to get the vote. Now, is that based on women being equal? No, it's based on women being different. So that's how women got the vote. This is arguing that women are equal, which was way ahead of its time. Nobody's really going to believe that till like the 1970s, right? When we start arguing that again. The way we got the vote was by saying that women were different. All right, so a couple more things. This is Sojourner Truth. She was a former slave. She became free because New York made illegal slavery. And I want you to take a look at 3 of her statements. She's extremely revolutionary. So what I want you to do is, what is she arguing here? And then what is she arguing here? And then what is she arguing here? Okay, again, she has 3 different arguments, so make sure you answer 7A, B, and C. And just as a reminder, I don't know if you guys did this in elementary school, but they had the whole character counts. It's just a reminder that the whole thing about women being at home, teaching their children how to be good citizens, it's still, you know, going on today. Okay, so you can see how industrialization and religious revival combined to create the cult of domesticity, which many argue led to the cult of redemptive womanhood and voluntarism. So hopefully you can see that argument. Thank you.